Hi, everyone, and welcome to Professionals Unplugged. Thank you for joining me for another candid conversation about work. I'm Inga Hepton, your host and owner of Medea International. So I'm an executive coach, and my mission is to help people improve their impact and success, especially by helping leaders improve and develop their executive presence. And with me today, I have Jan Barlow. She is a thought disruptor, facilitator of change, and founder of the nonprofit organization Better Job Fit, a community of resources to help people reimagine work and life while raising workforce awareness. And I have Matt Luensmann. Matt is the owner of MJL Recruiting and Consulting, and his method for recruiting and hiring talent in 45 days or less is tried and tested by understanding hiring needs and creating tailored recruiting strategies that align with the company's goals and values. And last not least, I have Dave Nordel. Dave is a military transition coach, motivational speaker, and leadership coach. After 30 years of active military service and retired Commander Chief Master Sergeant, he's a passionate advocate for veteran empowerment. So, today's topic is the importance of company culture. I'm so thrilled to have you all here because one way or another we all touch on that topic. But Dave, why don't you why don't you
Uh,
get this started? I'm sorry.
I love it. I love it, Inga. Command Chief Master Sergeant sounds so much better with a German accent. It's awesome.
Right?
So
I try. Listen, I try hard to get it right. Because last time I didn't. It took me a while.
it's fabulous. I know. It's great. It's great. You know, it's great to be here with everybody. I think we'll have a lot of fun with this. I thought a lot about this yesterday. I was out doing my walk in 112 degrees here in Arizona, but I thought about this yesterday and I thought about the word culture because I'm passionate about culture. But I think the two are intertwined with culture and environment. And when you talk about company culture, that's something that people can see, feel, and hear almost immediately when they walk through the door. I noticed Matt's kind of into this work, right? And when you're aligning people with your organization, you're not bringing them in to do work, or you should not be bringing them in to do work. You should be bringing them in for them to contribute to the company, to the overall goodness of that. So what does your culture look like, and what does it smell like, and what does it feel like to people? So culture is actually an alive thing. I like to look at it as animate. And so if the culture has to live, it has to have the right environment to thrive. So I'll leave that there because I think that in there that kind of starts the conversation because the environment is everything, right? And I'm living in an environment right now with if I want to go play golf, I have to play golf in over 100-degree heat. So I have to be able to adapt to that. And so if you want a culture to thrive, you have to have the right environment. And so that's dictated from the leadership and then how that permeates through the organization to the lower levels of leadership. So yeah, it's an exciting topic.
I love the thought you put in there in terms of culture as a living thing, because you're right. We do feel its presence, so to speak, straight away, even though we can't really pinpoint it. I find it really hard to, if you do experience it, it's like, oh, how would I describe it? Is there anything which, you could have as in order to describe the animal of culture, and how do you pinpoint it?
Yeah, I mean,
Sure. Well, go ahead, Matt. Sorry.
I think it's, as Dave said, it's a living thing, right? So I work a lot in the startup space. And so these companies are saying to me, hey, we need to add 20 people. Okay, well, going from 10 to 30 people, you have to really think about how is adding 20 more people going to impact my culture? Right. So it's a lot of the conversation has to revolve around, okay, so who do you have and what were the skills and personality traits that they brought with them that you need to continue having in your new people, right? So were they outgoing? Were they quiet? Were they, charismatic? What were those things that they brought with them that whether interviewed them for that particular skill or not, you knew that they had, and you've seen the positive impact that it's had on your culture, right? Because doubling your company size, your culture is going to change if you're not careful.
Mm.
And so you put one wrong person in that mix and you can completely kill it. And then you have an uphill battle to try and get it back. Right. So it's of the ultimate importance. And this ties into all the things that I talk to my clients about when they interview, of figuring out, is this person qualified or not? And what does that look like? And what does an unqualified person look like? And really what I mean by that is, are they going to fit your culture, number one? But more importantly, are they going to drive it forward? Right. So when I worked at Microsoft, it was, on the tech side, that's where my background is. And we're like, okay, so do they have the tech skills, but also are they going to help drive our culture forward? Meaning, are they going to help propel it, or are they going to hinder it? And figuring out, okay, is this person the right puzzle piece for the gap that we're trying to fill in our company?
What's interesting, Matt and Dave, and Inga, I'm listening to the culture fit, right? I come from a global pharmaceutical background, and I was in a position that I had created as I was a bridge between our global sales and marketing division, and clinical affairs R&D. And so we were working on our second generation medical device FDA clinical approval. And that's a very detailed process. So it's a process between sales and marketing, R&D, clinical affairs, two very different and polar opposite behavior diversity, R&D, clinical tech, and they were all the same behavior profile. So they were the opposite of sales and marketing. And what ended up with the pharmaceutical company, they actually lost their FDA clinical approval because those two entities weren't integrated or educated on how to work with the polar opposite of behavior, of people of the opposite behavior. But it ended up that they couldn't move the dial forward when it came to getting this FDA clinical approval because they couldn't communicate well within their own ecosystem, if you will, because they were all the same. And they ended up losing $2 billion because they couldn't communicate because of those behavior differences. Right. So, it's one of these things that really is not, I think, valued. We are moving from, hey, let's all be the same behaviorally for culture fit. And again, it's not new news we have to go beyond making everybody a kumbaya moment of we're all the same, right? And that's interesting. We've got to learn how to communicate and focus on who's the best for the job that we're hiring them to do, and then educating one another on how do we work or communicate with people who are different, right? To create that conscious culture, not just upfront, hey, do you fit in? It's about who's the best fit for the job first. And then let's take that to the next level to co-create a culture of respect and understanding, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And you touched on quite a few important points there, right? One of them, obviously, if the culture isn't working, or if it's, a culture where people can't really thrive, where they don't have the psychological safety in order to really be a little bit critical, in particular when it comes to new product development, right? When people are starting to operate in silos because they do not collaborate, or if they think they collaborate, it's a sign of weakness because they're relying on others, right? The detrimental effect of that, even for an organization, is, in the case you just described, it's a loss of millions or even billions, and people are frustrated. They don't raise certain issues based on fear. Or even what am I trying to say? Or even the fluctuation of staff, right? entire cost of just keep recruiting. And you guys must seen that a lot of those things. And those are just kind of a few things which can really, really go on. So how do we enable others to be really more conscious about it, in particular when organizations are growing and changing?
This is amazing because I was sitting there as Jan was talking and kind of engineering things from scratch. And I've sat in a million of them. I know we all have. Oftentimes we have this, we're going to sit down corporately and we're going to look at our mission and our vision and our values. And we get in this magic room and everybody sits around and we kick around and we wordsmith stuff and we knock vowels off the ends of things and we make action verbs or make it passive or make it active. We keep messing with these things and it makes us feel good because we redefine ourselves into something that we want to be. And so I don't think that these things are worthless because really what you're defining is the foundations to your culture, right? The entry level, this is the entry level stuff that you have to demonstrate to be part of our culture. Values are huge in that. So you just talked about retention, recruiting, and turnover. I would say right to the top of that is when you have values and misalignment. And I'll tell you in the veteran space, when a veteran goes to an organization, they look at mission, vision, and values, especially values. They're looking for the same keywords. You know, the Air Force, the core values are integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all you do. So if I'm hiring onto a company as a veteran and I see service, excellence, and integrity, those are going to resonate with me. But if I get into a company that the culture is actually counterintuitive to the values that are on the wall, then you don't have that. So if you want to have the culture, the stay culture, as I like to call it, you should do stay interviews to make sure people are aligned with your culture. If you don't have the culture that compels people to stay, then it works backwards. So when we're doing this mission, vision, and value stuff, you foundationally have got to cement that in. It's like pouring cement. You got to let it dry and it's got to be rock hard. And then to Jan's point, when you bring people in, and I think to Matt's point, even when I was listening to Matt talk, I was thinking to myself, one of the reasons that culture derails, especially when you add all of these people, is you get one or two people in there that don't adhere to the culture. And for some reason, we don't have enough courage to ask them to go someplace else that better aligns with. And we let them stay. And then the culture erodes. And when the culture erodes, it redefines itself. And it doesn't define itself at the executive level. It redefines itself at the tactical, the lowest level. And that is the true culture. So then you have this disconnect between perceived culture and actual culture. And that gap in there is huge to navigate.
Yeah.
And so you think everything. And so I do one of my keynotes is I have a character I call Randy the Rat. And Randy the Rat lives on a ship. And, you know, where do rats live on the ship? They live below the waterline, right? They live below the waterline. And below the waterline is the culture of your organization. And if things are going wrong, that's why the rats leave the ship first, because they know that it's going wrong. So look at retention, recruiting, and turnover and understand that you probably have a perception at an executive level of how you think things are and that you're doing just fine. Yet the message is that the rats are leaving the ship. And in there somewhere is your true culture. And you have to keep an eye on that.
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
Inga,
Wow, you hit so many things, Dave, that I wanted to jump in before you, but I let you go. But, you know, because there was one of the things that while Jan was talking, that I was sitting here thinking to myself, you know, it's also, you have to figure out, because you have the core values, as you were talking about, Dave, that you want everybody to have, but right, thinking about the difference between what does one of your engineers need versus what does one of your sales and marketing people need are going to be different, right? And so, Jan, kind of to your point, you can't bring everybody in expecting the exact same thing from a broad perspective, right? Like your salespeople probably can't be shy and meek, right? But you could have a developer who's more in that space, especially if they're not customer facing. If you're like, hey, I just need you to code in the corner all day, like put your headphones on and hang out in the dark, as long as they can communicate with the teammates and their manager, you're going to be okay. Right.
Yeah.
But you can't have a salesperson that wants to hide in the corner, because that doesn't work. Right. But
Yeah.
Dave, I think you also hit the nail on the head with, you know, the stated culture being different from the actual culture. And that tends to be the biggest thing that I see when companies go to try to expand, is they're like, hey, we have the framework, but then they fail to apply it.
Mm.
And so then the culture changes, and then you have that gap that you were talking about. And then they kind of sit around and they look at themselves and they go, well, how'd that happen? And how do we fix it? Well, you don't fix it by going back to the boardroom,
Right.
right? You don't fix it by going back to the magical room. You fix it by taking it down to your mid managers and the managers below that to fix it. And if you got to get some rats off the ship because they're the problem causers, they're the ruckus that's ruining your culture, you got to go kick people out. But again, like you said, Dave, sometimes we're too fearful of that for whatever reason. It's like, no, you got to kick them out, because if you wait too long, it might be too late.
It's the cancer,
Yeah.
right? It's the cancer that grows within the organization. You know, what's interesting, Dave and I were talking about this a couple of weeks ago. I saw an article in the Dallas newspaper about Texas trying to hire veterans. They're trying to hire teachers. And so they extended it out to veterans, right? To encourage veterans to apply to be teachers. Well, what's interesting, they said out of all the applications, they only received 28. And it's because the values of the military are different than the reality of what schools are teaching, right? So it's just very interesting when we talk about these different aspects of culture. And in some ways, especially in academia, you know, they want to attract veterans. Well, what they are doing, meaning the work that they're doing, content they're teaching, is not aligned to the culture that who they
Yeah.
want to attract. So that was just really fascinating to see it from that perspective.
Can I ask all three of you, based on what Jan just said there? I mean, I'm going to kind of reverse engineer this. Do you ever talk to companies about the culture that exists and then the limitations on who they're going to attract based on the culture, just like what Jan just described? Because that conversation doesn't happen very often. People want people to come and work for them, and they don't even know what they look like forward facing.
Yeah, Dave. I mean, Dave, that's a great question. It's one that I'm going to add to my arsenal, because until you just said that, I never really thought about that. You know, as always, well, what do you want it to be? Not what actually is it? So that will be something that I will add to my Rolodex. Be like, okay, so tell me what you think it is or what you want it to be. And then tell me what it is right now. And what is it missing that you need to fix it? Because you're right, those conversations aren't happening. Nobody's asking that question.
Well, and they ask
What's the name of
the vision, right?
Go ahead,
Okay, what is now? Who are you attracting now? It's just like any business, you know, when we're consulting with business owners who want to grow their business. Okay, so tell me about the clients that you're attracting now. Your best client. Tell me about your best clients, right? So tell me about your best employees.
The majority of organizations, right, they put their values and beliefs and goals together. If they're doing a good thing, they think about it on an annual basis. The majority of the companies, they think about it once in a decade, probably when something more significant changes within the organization. Usually they don't give a second thought to it, but I agree, we should ask this more often. I usually have this conversation when I talk to private individuals, in particular when they want to do change, and they come and describe why they're not satisfied with the current situation. And then that's usually how we get into a conversation around culture and what it's like and why is it detrimental to their, whether it's well-being or their professional life and their success, right? What's hindering them, and how can they open up that kind of conversation? But it's more how do you encourage a conversation on the higher level to really make people more aware of, well, it's a living thing. Think about it as a living thing. It's not just a one-off exercise. It's something you ought to be doing not just on an annual basis, kind of more consciously whenever you have even the slightest change in the organization. So I'm curious, how would you encourage that and implement that?
Well, Inga, I want to take this just a slightly different direction before we go back to that, because, we're sitting here talking about this, but when you end up talking to people in reality, right, the problem that you run into is like they're aware of it, right? Like you say to people, "Hey, well, we just uncovered this issue." And they're like, "Yeah, I know." Okay. So then why didn't you do anything about it? Right? And the answer that I've been able to figure out is that business owners in particular are aware of what's going on in their business. But the question really is, are they actually in enough pain to do something about it?
Hmm.
Right? Because I just had a potential client last week that it had been determined before they were brought to me that they needed a director of sales. They had been relying on referrals to grow their business. The referrals were drying up. So they're like, hey, we need somebody to go out and pound the pavement and actually bring in business. So we had a conversation. They seemed all in. And then all of a sudden it's, sorry, we've decided to not move forward. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Well, they're clearly not in enough pain yet to
Right.
realize how pressing of an issue this is. So when they lose another $150,000, $200,000 and their sales are in the toilet, then he's going to call me back and I'll be like, well, yeah, but we discerned this 6 months ago and then you decided not to move forward. So you created your own problem, but it's the same thing with culture. Like when your culture starts to struggle, you know it. The question is, are you ready, willing, and able to do something about it?
Yeah.
And usually,
Yes.
human nature is, I want to complain about stuff, right? I want to vent to somebody, but unless I'm in acute pain, like, hey, I'm trying to put a band-aid on a gunshot wound and I've been shot 8 times and now I'm finally in enough pain to do something about it. Because I'm sure you guys have all had this conversation and you're sitting here going, because I use this phrase a lot with people. It's like the meme of the dog in the house with the coffee, right? And the house is on fire. And the wording is, it's fine, everything's fine, right? And the business owner is the dog in the house. And we're the people outside looking at the house on fire going, bro, your house is on fire. And they're sitting there drinking their coffee going, nah, man, it's fine. Well,
Yeah.
okay, how much more does your house need to be on fire before you decide to do something about it?
You can't resurrect the dead, Matt. I'm an emergency room nurse in my other life. And I love when people come in and say, I have chest pain. I hate it when people come in and they're under CPR, right? But a lot of times, in your example, a lot of times people are already at the rate of CPR, and then they call and they say, I need help. I don't understand. I'll throw another one out there just to let you guys kick around, because in the middle of all this, there's an elephant. And it's very hard. And I'll tell you, when I navigate this with some companies, I get thrown out of the room immediately, which is fine because then it shows me where my effort needs to be. We're dealing with a high level of narcissism in the corporate world right now. And so this pain point that Matt described for corporate leaders, because of the way that they've gotten there and the way we've raised
Right.
CEOs and executives, there is a level of narcissism that is a major roadblock to this type of evolution, or this forward thinking thing where you can tinker with stuff and treat culture like it's something that's alive. Because when you think internally, you get this, the house is not on fire, everything is fine kind of thing. And then when the ship does start to sink, it's everybody else's fault. And nobody wants to work in an organization like that. And quite frankly, there's far too many of those.
Yeah. I think there's also, if you think about it, there's also still that belief kicking about, and I had a conversation about it a little while back, of kindness and work, and that kind of the common misconception really is that kindness is weakness. Well, it's actually doing the complete opposite. If you do show kindness to people in the workplace, right, does open up a completely different level of relationship. It facilitates the trust and the rapport, but it also creates a more positive working environment. And kindness doesn't necessarily mean, you always have to agree with somebody and not go into a conflict, right? That's also not part of kindness. Kindness is also telling somebody the hard truth. But we often completely forget that. For some reason, there's still that massive belief, and at least in our Western culture, that we need to be those tough leaders, call out the BS all the time, be strong, can't show any vulnerability. And we're only slowly starting to understand how detrimental that is, and then that actually creates a complete kind of detrimental culture as well, to your point, Dave, where we probably promote the wrong type of people all the time.
Well, and there's that. And the other thing is that kindness and respect run congruent. And that gap that I talked about perceived culture and real culture, that closes really quick because the people on the bottom will tell you exactly what's going on and give you that chance to adjust if you have that culture already of that respect and kindness. And you don't feel like you're going to get your head chopped off if you bring something up that needs to be worked on.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've got one. I know we're running low out of time, but I'm interested in terms of how do you pinpoint it? So if you're somebody, or if you work with somebody who is looking to join a new organization or is looking to change employers, and we all know that we kind of can pick up on a culture in terms of we walk into a building and we just kind of get a feeling of it. It's kind of like, oh yeah, I feel comfortable, I don't feel comfortable. But what are some things people can pay close attention to when they make their own decisions? And what are the kind of things maybe they can ask about in order to determine what the current culture is?
I think for me, on an individual basis, people need to know more about themselves. So everything is energy. That's not woo-woo, that's science. Okay. So when you walk into maybe an interview, or you're speaking to somebody on the phone or in-person interview, you're picking up on energy. Okay. And so people are perceiving those emotions or those senses differently. What I like to encourage people to do is know yourself and start asking questions about really how you are going to experience that situation or that environment. So I'm a 10 on independence. So pretty much I know to ask, hey, I'm a 10 on independence. And then I tell them this is how success works with me and how I've worked with other employers and supervisors that has allowed me to create success for the company. And, I'm the type of person, you tell me what the goal is. We meet once a week. I'll check in with you. Pretty much that's kind of how I like to roll. And how do you work with someone like me? You ask these open-ended questions to see what a person's response is going to be, right? So you got to know more about yourself so you can ask specific questions of how you're going to fit in or how those people are going to work with you. So to me, it's really important for an individual to know, is that going to be the right place for you?
Jan, I think you hit the nail on the head here, right? Because we've gotten so out of touch with ourselves almost, right? So while you're talking, I'm sitting here thinking to myself, well, how do you feel culture? And I think back to years ago when you'd go interview and you'd have to go on site and you'd get to meet the team and you get to talk to people and feel the culture, right? You could tell walking into a spot if people actually enjoyed working there or if they were miserable, and if it was a hostile culture, if it was a welcoming culture, what it was. And while remote work is great, and I'm an advocate of remote work, as I'm sitting here having this conversation with you guys, I'm starting to rethink that a little bit, because if you never step foot in the building, how can you tell what the culture is? Because the people you're talking to are going to tell you what you want to hear. They're going to tell you the things that they think are going to get you on board. And to your point, Jan, most people don't know enough about how they operate to know, wait, that's not going to be a good fit for me. I need to remove myself from this process because I'm going to be miserable. But we're in this job market right now where it's like, crap, I'm desperate. Like, even if I know this is going to be terrible and they offer it, I have to take it because I got to pay bills. I got to survive. I got to keep a roof over my head. I got to put food on the table. I have to do all of these things. And it just makes it worse.
Yeah. Especially coming from that lack or fear mindset, right, Matt? I mean,
Yep.
From a individual conscious perspective, we have to up our healing game. I mean, that's all there is to it. I mean, AI is coming in to, really do a lot of things that human beings would do. So it's time for us to really understand and invest in ourselves to know how many different, how can we layer our skill set to transition to different positions? Like how, project manager, the title in one company, right? Like, oh, I did project management in this company. Well, that's a skill set, but that's called something else in a different industry, right? So I think we would need to really focus more about learning more about ourselves and how, is this culture? I mean, we got to learn the questions to ask, right?
Well, there seems to be we could talk endlessly about culture. I think we've still got so many different aspects where we can probably dissect culture, how it actually benefits an organization as well as the individual. Or let me rephrase that, how it benefits the individual as well as the organizations and overall profitability of any company. I'm just afraid we're out of time. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm gonna keep thinking about culture being a living thing. I really like that. Well, one of the main takeaways I'm having, besides obviously the living thing of culture, is all of us can and should be raising our self-awareness when it comes to the different things we actually are looking for in a organization, in a job, and the type of skills we bring to the table. And that's not just the technical skills, because if we have that level of awareness, we are able to ask different types of questions, and we maybe even are able to overcome our fears when it comes to changing, because that's usually what holds us back, doesn't it? Well, again, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for listening to Professionals Unplugged. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. And if you'd like to hear more, please subscribe wherever you like to listen to your podcasts. And if you'd like to hear even more, check out my website, www.medeaintl.com, for insights, connecting, and coaching. Until then, unplug and look after yourself.